Good morning, students. I hope you have watched the previous video of this chapter. So students, in the previous video, we learned about Buddha. So it's the time to move a step further and study about Jainism. The last and 24th Tirthankara of the Jainas, Vardhaman Mahavira, also spread his message around the time of Buddha, which is about 2500 years ago. He was a Kshatriya, prince of the Lichavis, a group that was part of the Vaji Sangha. At the age of 30, he left home and went to live in a forest. For 12 years, he led a hard and lonely life, at the end of which he attained enlightenment. He taught a simple doctrine which says men and women who wished to know the truth must leave their homes. They must follow very strictly the rules of ahimsa, which means not hurting or killing living beings. Children, do you know why ordinary people could understand the teachings of Mahavira and his followers? This is because they used Prakrit. There were several forms of Prakrit used in different parts of the country and named after the regions in which they were used. For example, the Prakrit spoken in Magdha was known as Magdi. Followers of Mahavira, who were known as Jainas, had to lead very simple lives, begging for food. They had to be absolutely honest and were especially asked not to steal. Also, they had to observe celibacy, which means as the promise to remain unmarried. And men had to give up everything, including their clothes. It was very difficult for most men and women to follow these strict rules. Thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more remained behind and supported those who became monks and nuns, providing them with food. Jainism was supported mainly by traders, farmers who had to kill insects to protect their crops found it more difficult to follow the rules. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to different parts of North India and to Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally for several centuries. They were written down in the form in which they are presently available at a place called Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. Both the Mahavira and the Buddha felt that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge. They arranged for them to stay together in the Sangha, an association of those who left their homes. The rules made for the Buddhist Sangha were written down in a book called the Vinaya Pitaka. From this, we know that there were separate branches for men and women. All men could join the Sangha. However, children had to take the permission of their parents and slaves, that of their masters. Those who worked for the king had to take his permission, and debtors that of creditors. Women had to take their husband's permission. Men and women who joined the Sangha led simple lives. They meditated for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. That is why they were known as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which is a Prakrit word for beggar. They taught others and helped one another. They also held meetings to settle and quarrels that took place within the Sangha. Those who joined the Sangha included Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans, and slaves. Many of them wrote down the teachings of the Buddha. Some of them also composed beautiful poems describing their life in the Sangha. Children, both Jaina and Buddhist monks went from place to place throughout the year teaching people. The only time they stayed in one place was during the rainy season, when it was very difficult to travel. Then their supporters built temporary shelters for them in gardens, or they lived in natural caves in hilly areas. As the time went on, many supporters of the monks and nuns and they themselves felt the need for more permanent shelters, and so monasteries were built. These were known as viharas. The earliest viharas were made of wood and then of brick. Some were even in caves that were dug out in hills, especially in western India. Very often, the land on which the vihara was built was donated by a rich merchant or a landowner or the king. The local people came with gifts of food, clothing, and medicines for the monks and nuns. In return, they taught the people over the centuries. Buddhism spread to many parts of the subcontinent and beyond. Now, children, let us study about the system of ashrams. Around the time when Jainism and Buddhism were becoming popular, Brahmins developed the system of ashrams. Here, the word ashram does not mean a place where people live and meditate. It is used instead for a stage of life. Four ashrams were recognized as Brahmacharya, Gristha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya men were expected to lead simple lives and study the Vedas during the early years of their life. This is Brahmacharya. Then they had to marry and live as householder. This is Gristha. Next is Vanaprastha, in which they had to live in forest and meditate. Finally, they had to give up everything and become sannyasinis. This system of ashrams allowed men to spend some part of their lives in meditation. Generally, women were not allowed to study the Vedas and they had to follow the ashrams chosen by their husbands.